question revolves around the interpretation of the National Electrical Code, specifically the 2002 edition concerning bathroom branch circuits, focusing on Articles 210.11c3 and 210.23a. The primary concern is whether lighting, vanity lights, or an exhaust fan can be connected to the same 20-amp circuit as the receptacle in a bathroom. Article 210.11c3 addresses bathroom branch circuits, stating that in addition to the number of branch circuits required by other parts of this section, at least one 20-amp branch circuit shall be provided to supply the bathroom receptacle outlets. Such circuit shall have no other outlets. However, an exception is noted stating where the 20-amp circuit supplies a single bathroom, outlets for other equipment within the same bathroom shall be permitted to be supplied in accordance with 210.23a. Article 210.23 Permissible loads dictates that in no case shall the load exceed the branch circuit ampere rating. An individual branch circuit shall be permitted to supply any load for which it is rated. A branch circuit supplying two or more outlets or receptacles shall supply only the load specified according to its size as specified in 210.23 and as summarized in 210.24 and Table 210.24. 210.23a 15 and 20 amp branch circuits states that a 15 or 20 amp branch circuit shall be permitted to supply lighting units or other utilization equipment, or a combination of both, and shall comply with 210.23a on an ATWO. There is an exception to this rule which states that the small appliance branch circuits, laundry branch circuits, and bathroom branch circuits required in the dwelling units by 210.11 current 2 and 3 shall supply only the receptacle outlets specified in that section. Now to resolve this apparent conflict, first consider Article 210.11c3, which requires a dedicated 20-amp branch circuit for bathroom receptacle outlets, which also permits the circuit to supply other outlets within the same bathroom, but only if it complies with 210.23a. Then consider Article 210.23a, which permits a 15 or 20 amp branch circuit to supply lighting units or other utilization equipment, but has an exception that prohibits such circuits from supplying receptacle outlets specified in 210.11 2 and 3. The exception in 210.23 does not apply to the 20 amp branch circuit required by 210.11c3. This is because 210.11c3 specifically permits other outlets to be supplied by the bathroom branch circuit, provided they comply with 210.23a. Therefore, lighting, vanity lights, and exhaust fans can be placed on the same 20-amp branch circuit as the receptacle in a bathroom, as long as certain conditions are met. Firstly, the circuit must be a dedicated 20-amp branch circuit. Secondly, the circuit must meet the load requirements of 210.23a. Thirdly, the circuit must comply with all other applicable National Electrical Code requirements. Keep in mind this interpretation is based on the 2002 edition of the National Electrical Code. Requirements may have changed in subsequent editions, and it is always recommended to refer to the most current edition for accurate information. The key is that 210.11. C3 allows other outlets if they comply with 210.23a, which typically addresses lighting and general use. The exception in 210.23a does not override the allowance in 210.11. C3, thus lighting is permitted. In summary, the 20-amp bathroom receptacle circuit can also power lighting, vanity lights, and exhaust fans within the same bathroom, provided that the total load does not exceed the 20-amp circuit's capacity and all other relevant National Electrical Code guidelines are followed. It's essential to calculate the total load of all devices connected to the circuit to ensure it remains within the safe operating limits of the circuit breaker and wiring. Here are some factors to consider when calculating the load. Firstly, determine the wattage of each lighting fixture, vanity light, and exhaust fan that will be connected to the circuit. This information is typically found on the device's label or in its specifications. Secondly, add up the wattage of all the devices to get the total wattage. Thirdly, calculate the current draw of the circuit. This can be done by dividing the total wattage by the voltage of the circuit, which is typically 120 volts in a residential setting. The formula is amps equals watts divided by volts. For example, if the total wattage of all devices is 1200 watts, the current draw would be 1200 watts divided by 120 volts, which equals 10 amps. Fourthly, make sure the current draw does not exceed 80% of the circuit breaker's rating. For a 20 amp circuit breaker, the maximum continuous load should not exceed 16 amps. This is a safety factor to prevent the circuit breaker from tripping due to overheating. Fifthly, consider any additional loads that may be connected to the circuit, such as a hairdryer or other appliances that may be used in the bathroom. These loads should be included in the total load calculation. Furthermore, it is important to ensure that all wiring and devices are properly rated for the circuit's voltage and current. This includes using the correct gauge wire for the circuit and using devices that are rated for at least 20 amps. If the total load exceeds the circuit's capacity, it is necessary to either reduce the load or install a separate circuit for the additional devices. Overloading a circuit can lead to overheating, which can cause a fire. It is also important to follow all other relevant National Electrical Code guidelines when installing electrical circuits. This includes using the correct wiring methods, grounding, and overcurrent protection. It is also important to have the installation inspected by a qualified electrical inspector to ensure that it meets all applicable codes and standards. Remember that electrical work can be dangerous, and it is always best to hire a qualified electrician to do the work if you are not comfortable doing it yourself. A qualified electrician will have the knowledge and experience to ensure that the work is done safely and correctly. Now let's clarify some of the potential ambiguities and ensure a comprehensive understanding of the code requirements. It is also important to define the terms used in the code. Firstly, branch circuit refers to the circuit conductors between the final overcurrent device protecting the circuit and the outlets. Secondly, outlet is a point on the wiring system at which current is taken to supply utilization equipment. Thirdly, receptacle outlet is an outlet where one or more receptacles are installed. Fourthly, utilization equipment is equipment that utilizes electric energy for electronic, electromechanical, chemical, heating, lighting, or similar purposes. Now let's examine the specific requirements of 210.11c3 and 210.23 in more detail. 210.11c3 requires at least 120 amp branch circuit to supply the bathroom receptacle outlets. This means that the circuit must be dedicated to the bathroom receptacle outlets and cannot supply any other outlets outside of the bathroom. The exception to this rule allows the 20 amp circuit to supply other outlets within the same bathroom, but only if it complies with 210.23a. This means that the other outlets must be lighting units or other utilization equipment and must not exceed the circuit's ampere rating. 210.23a permits a 15 or 20 amp branch circuit to supply lighting units or other utilization equipment. This means that the circuit can supply any type of lighting fixture, such as incandescent, fluorescent, or LED, as well as other types of utilization equipment, such as exhaust fans, hair dryers, or curling irons. However, the circuit must not supply any receptacle outlets other than the bathroom receptacle outlets required by 210.11c3. The exception to this rule prohibits the 20 amp circuit from supplying any receptacle outlets other than the bathroom receptacle outlets. This means that the circuit cannot supply any other receptacle outlets in the bathroom, such as those for a nightlight or an electric toothbrush charger. This is to ensure that the bathroom receptacle outlets are dedicated to the use of hair dryers, curling irons, and other high-power appliances that may be used in the bathroom. In summary, the 20 amp bathroom receptacle circuit can supply lighting units and other utilization equipment within the same bathroom, but it cannot supply any other receptacle outlets other than the bathroom receptacle outlets required by 210.11c3. It is also important to note that the National Electrical Code is a minimum standard, and local codes may have additional requirements. It is always best to check with the local electrical inspector to ensure that the installation meets all applicable codes and standards. Finally, here is an example of how to apply these code requirements in a practical situation. Suppose you are installing a new bathroom in a house that is being renovated. The bathroom will have one receptacle outlet, one lighting fixture, one vanity light, and one exhaust fan. You will need to install a 20 amp branch circuit to supply the bathroom receptacle outlets in accordance with 210.11c3. You can also connect the lighting fixture, vanity light, and exhaust fan to the same 20 amp circuit, as long as the total load does not exceed the circuit's capacity. To calculate the total load, you will need to determine the wattage of each device. Suppose the receptacle outlet is rated for 1800 watts, the lighting fixture is rated for 100 watts, the vanity light is rated for 60 watts, and the exhaust fan is rated for 50 watts. The total load would be 1800 watts plus 100 watts plus 60 watts plus 50 watts, which equals 2010 watts. To calculate the current draw, you would divide the total wattage by the voltage of the circuit. Assuming the voltage is 120 volts, the current draw would be 2010 watts divided by 120 volts, which equals 16.75 amps. Since the current draw is less than 80% of the circuit breaker's rating, the circuit is considered to be safe. However, it is important to note that this calculation is based on the assumption that all of the devices will be operating at the same time. In reality, it is unlikely that all of the devices will be operating at the same time, so the actual current draw will likely be lower. It is also important to note that the receptacle outlet is rated for 1800 watts, but it is unlikely that you will be using that much power at any one time. The receptacle outlet is rated for 1800 watts to allow for the use of high-power appliances, such as hair dryers and curling irons. In conclusion, understanding the nuances of the National Electrical Code, particularly Articles 210.11, C3 and 210.23a, is crucial for ensuring safe and compliant electrical installations in bathrooms. The 20 amp bathroom receptacle circuit can indeed power lighting, vanity lights, and exhaust fans, provided the total load remains within the circuit's capacity and all other code requirements are met. Always consult the latest edition of the National Electrical Code and local regulations for the most accurate and up-to-date information. Remember that when the code refers to compliance with Section 210.23a, it is referencing that the total load should not exceed the rating of the circuit. So if the total load of the lighting and receptacle outlets exceeds 20 amps at 120 volts or 2400 volt amps, then it is not compliant. Also, that the National Electrical Code is updated regularly, so always refer to the latest version to make sure any installations meet the most current standards. In summary, the exception in 210.23a does not override the general permission granted in 210.11c3, allowing other outlets like lighting and fans to be in the same 20 amp circuit as the bathroom receptacle, provided the load calculations and other applicable National Electrical Code rules are followed.